This wasn't a cheap spin-off. It was the genuine continuation of the 5-year mission of the USS Enterprise. The same ship, the same crew, the same mandate to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, and boldly go where no man had gone before. What animation gave the creative team was something live-action television in the late 1960s simply couldn't afford: the freedom to build alien worlds without a studio budget collapsing under the weight of them. Directors didn't have to choose between a decent monster costume and a passable alien planet. They could have both. Suddenly, the cosmos felt as expansive as it was supposed to. Strange planets, bizarre life forms, moral dilemmas wrapped in science fiction. It was like getting a sequel to something you loved, except it showed up every Saturday morning for free. And here's something most people don't hold on to. The show ran from 1973 to 1974 on NBC, produced 2 seasons and 22 episodes, and brought the full original cast back to the microphone for every single one of them. That wasn't automatic. Getting William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and the rest of the crew to commit to a Saturday morning animated series was a real decision, and it made all the difference in how the show felt.
Did you notice Dr. McCoy's reaction when I asked him if there was any possibility he might have made an error?
The heroes we wanted to be. Captain James T. Kirk was the man, not in some swaggering, self-satisfied way, but in the way that actually matters. He was bold without being reckless, confident without going cold, and he carried the weight of every person on that ship like it was personal, because to him, it was. Kirk led with instinct and heart, and in a universe of regulations and protocols, he bent them just enough to land on the right side of things. He was the kind of leader who made you feel like the rules existed to serve people, not the other way around, which, for a generation of kids, was a genuinely useful thing to see modeled. Spock was the counterbalance Kirk needed: cool, logical, almost infuriatingly composed when everything around him was coming apart. But beneath that Vulcan surface was a genuine complexity that kids understood in their bones. The tension between 2 worlds, 2 identities, 2 competing ways of being a person. Dr. McCoy was there to poke at every one of those contradictions with a southern drawl and a medical scanner. And the 3 of them together made for something genuinely worth watching. A friendship that worked precisely because they kept disagreeing. Then there was the rest of the crew. Scotty keeping the Enterprise flying on sheer engineering will. Sulu at the helm with quiet precision and real courage. Chekhov bringing youth and earnestness to every shift. These weren't background players. They were a family, and watching them function together had a warmth to it that felt rare then and still does. The trust between them wasn't explained or demonstrated in big dramatic moments. It was just present, woven into how they moved through every episode.
There are not many places one could hide in here.
The woman who commanded respect. Lieutenant Uhura wasn't just answering hailing frequencies. She held the bridge together with calm authority and sharp intelligence. And in an era when animated female characters were routinely pushed to the margins or reduced to reactions, she stood at her communications station with a presence that earned respect without ever having to demand it. She wasn't a love interest or a damsel or a plot device. She was a professional, vital, irreplaceable, and consistently treated that way by the writers and by her crewmates on screen. And in the final episode of the entire series, she stepped into a starring role alongside Spock and Sulu that made the case for exactly why she'd always belonged at the center of these stories. The 3 of them would face one of the most genuinely dangerous alien encounters the animated run produced, and Uhura would carry her share of it without flinching. Her calm under pressure had a particular weight to it. At a time when kids were still working out what strength was supposed to look like, Uhura offered one version of it that didn't involve raising her voice or reaching for a weapon. Just clarity, steadiness, and competence when the situation demanded it most.
He said there's always that possibility, and that's not like Bones at all.
The villains we loved to hate. Star Trek was never built around a single season-long villain. The genius of the format was the variety. Each episode brought a new threat, a new moral puzzle, a new reason for the Enterprise crew to justify their presence out there. But one adversary from the animated run stands above the rest, not just for menace, but for the kind of believable alien ferocity that makes a villain genuinely stick with you. The Kazinti. Feline warrior aliens built for combat, convinced of their own superiority, driven by the need to reclaim a warlike past that history had taken from them. They weren't intimidating just as a concept, they were credible. Their pride was what made them dangerous. Their arrogance was also, eventually, what made them vulnerable. And their confrontation with Spock, Sulu, and Uhura over a weapon of almost unimaginable destructive power is the story that closed out the entire series in a way that nobody, going in, would have predicted.
All decks report considerable shaking up, but no damage, sir.
Part 2. The Journey and Ending. The episodes that defined the run. 22 episodes, every one of them carrying genuine Star Trek DNA into an animated format that could go places the original series never had the budget to attempt. Writer Dorothy Fontana, one of the most respected voices from the original series, helped shape the animated run's best stories, and her fingerprints are on some of its strongest work. This wasn't filler television. These were real science fiction ideas given real emotional space to breathe, made by people who understood what the franchise stood for and took it seriously. The show moved through ancient alien civilizations, time manipulation, moral questions about power and restraint, and yes, giant cat warriors with a serious grudge. Each episode told its own complete story, a tradition inherited directly from the original series, which meant every Saturday morning felt genuinely fresh, rather than like a serialized obligation to keep up with. What the animation format unlocked was remarkable. Creatures that would have shattered any live-action production budget just appeared on screen, fully realized. Alien worlds that defied earthly logic got painted in without a second thought. The Enterprise herself looked sleeker and more alive than she ever had. For kids who'd grown up on the original series and reruns, this felt like an upgrade. Saturated color, synthesizer score, a whole wider universe suddenly within reach. The mission continues and gets deeper. Season 1 established the rhythm and reminded everyone what this show was at its core. The crew explored, discovered, and confronted the unknown with that signature blend of intellect and courage. Season 2, shorter but in many ways sharper, pushed the format further than the first season had. The stories grew more philosophically layered. The alien encounters felt more genuinely alien, less like earthly metaphor dressed up in a costume. And the challenges the Enterprise crew faced increasingly couldn't be solved by rerouting power through the deflector dish. The answers had to come from somewhere inside the characters, from their values, their reasoning, their willingness to choose what was right when it wasn't the easiest or most obvious path. Kirk's evolution across the run was subtle but real. The animated format gave writers room to lean into his moral core without the pressures of expensive location shoots or network notes demanding an explosion every act break. This was Star Trek actually thinking out loud, which, for a generation of kids just starting to figure out how the world worked, mattered more than the show probably ever got credit for.
Like others, this form seems to possess no gun sight.
The final episode, Smarter Than a Phaser Bank. October 12, 1974. The Slaver weapon aired and sent the animated Enterprise off on its last recorded voyage with just about everything that made this franchise worth watching in the first place. Spock, Sulu, and Uhura, without Kirk notably, are transporting a slaver stasis box, one of those ancient alien artifacts that surface in the Star Trek universe like relics from a civilization that burned itself out before anyone could learn from it. The Kazinti intercept them.
And when they ask you how to find your most powerful weapon setting, what would you give them?
These feline warriors are convinced they've finally gotten their hands on the ultimate prize, a slaver weapon, an ancient device of catastrophic power they believe to be indestructible and unstoppable. The kind of thing that could tilt history in one direction permanently. What happens next is pure Star Trek. The resolution doesn't come from phasers. It doesn't come from Kirk beaming down at the last second to pull everyone out of the fire. It comes from logic, from understanding the weapon's nature more clearly than the Kazinti do, and from 3 crew members trusting their minds when their options appear to have run out. The Kazinti are outsmarted. The weapon is neutralized. The dangerous technology is removed from the board before anyone can use it for the purpose it was built for. No climactic battle sequence, no villain speech before a dramatic end. Just the crew doing precisely what the mission had always required of them.
I can't find one thing we did when we were in the vortex that could possibly have affected the future.
How the series truly ended. The honest story of how Star Trek the animated series concluded is the part that still stings a little. It didn't end because the story was finished. It ended because NBC cut the budget after season 2, and the Enterprise was quietly docked without any kind of ceremony or acknowledgement that something real was being lost. No cliffhanger, no grand farewell. The slaver weapon wrapped up its own story cleanly, but as a series finale, it was entirely accidental. The 5-year mission just kept going, off-screen, in the imaginations of every kid who'd spent 2 years watching it on Saturday mornings. Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, Sulu, Chekhov, Scotty, they were all still out there somewhere. Television had just stopped following them. It's a little like the last day of summer camp. Nobody announced it was ending. You just stopped showing up, and one day you realized the summer was already over. What could have been? 22 episodes is a genuine creative achievement, but it's also just the beginning of a conversation that never got to finish. There were alien civilizations the show never visited, moral dilemmas it never posed, character moments that went unwritten. Uhura, Sulu, and Chekhov, each of whom had strong moments in the animated run, could have carried full episode arcs if the series had continued. The Kazinti, neutralized in that finale, but clearly rich with unexplored history and motivation, had more story in them. And the animation format itself, which had barely been pushed to its limits, might have produced something remarkable with another season or 2 of room to breathe. The 5-year mission, in reality, got 2 animated years. That's a gap that never quite closed for the fans who found something genuine in this particular chapter of the franchise.
One of my great-great-granddaddies way back had the finest garden in the South.
The legacy, bigger than the cancellation. What happened after the show ended is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Star Trek the Animated Series didn't quietly dissolve into the pop culture past. It kept going in ways that mattered. The show won a Daytime Emmy Award, the first Emmy in Star Trek history. For a Saturday morning cartoon, that wasn't just surprising, it was a statement. The writers and producers had built something that outlasted its format, and the television industry, however briefly, actually noticed. More than that, the animated series kept the Star Trek flame burning during the long gap between the original series cancellation and the franchise's return to theaters with Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979. Without those 2 seasons keeping the characters vivid and present in the culture, that theatrical comeback might have been a much harder case to make to a studio. The animated series was the connective tissue between eras, not the most visible part of the story, but a necessary one. You needed it to get where things were going, even if it's not the first chapter that comes to mind when you trace that journey. The franchise never stopped after that. Films, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. The Star Trek universe kept expanding, kept finding new frontiers worth exploring. Every chapter that followed owes something to the animated series for keeping the mission alive during the years when the rest of television had simply moved on. Captain Kirk and the Enterprise crew sailed off our screens in October 1974 without fanfare, without a proper goodbye, without the send-off they'd clearly earned. But the mission didn't end with the broadcast.
Lieutenant Norrid, you could have stopped him. Why didn't you fire?
I couldn't.
Star Trek the Animated Series spent 2 years making the case for everything the original show stood for. Curiosity over fear, intellect over firepower, and the stubborn belief that people, and whatever other beings were sharing the universe, could do better than their worst impulses. For a generation of kids watching on Saturday mornings in their pajamas, it was more than entertainment. It was a picture of what the future might actually look like if the right choices kept getting made, episode after episode, week after week. Which character were you when you played Star Trek on the playground? Kirk calling the shots? Spock raising one eyebrow at the absurdity of it all? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. And if this brought back something worth remembering, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next trip into the vintage vault. There are a lot more stories like this one out there. Live long and prosper. The final frontier isn't going anywhere.